Hey everyone, Ian King here, editor of Automatic Fortunes. And in today's webinar, I want to talk about the biggest trend in technology and how it relates to something we've seen in the past. And really, the past is a key to what I think we'll see in the future. And the trend I'm referring to actually is the convergence of some of the biggest mega trends that we've seen. So if you think about artificial intelligence and blockchain and 5G and what sorts of new developments these technologies as they converge are enabling, it kind of tells me that our labor force and our economy is going to be much more productive in the future than it is right now. So I want to rewind a little bit 100 years ago to 1919 to tell you a little story about the advent of mechanized farming equipment. Now, a few years before 1919, before World War I, most American farms were plowed and harvested and cultivated by horses and mules. And producing 100 acres of wheat took 40 to 50 labor hours. Now, those numbers dropped dramatically in the 1920s because three huge technologies of the time that were invented during the Industrial Revolution really converged at one point, and we saw just a proliferation in mechanized farming equipment. So if you think of number one, the internal combustion engine, it was developed in 1879 by Carl Benz, and that collided with an abundance of oil after World War I, and we were figuring out more ways to refine it and more use cases for oil. And third, the assembly line that was developed by Henry Ford in 1908 when he first produced the Model T. Now these three technologies converged and allowed for entrepreneurs and new businesses to create just an abundance of mechanized equipment, a lot cheaper than they were in the past. And so by 1921, there are actually 200,000 mechanized farming machines on US farms, and that's up from zero just a decade prior. And so what does that tell me? Well, you really want to look for areas where technology is converging. And if you think about the modern day, we've got these huge mega technology trends right now. Think about artificial intelligence or 5G or blockchain technology, and these trends are really converging, and they're creating these new business lines that are going to be very productive for society, and they're also going to be very disruptive. And one way to look at this is take a look at what's happening now with self-driving cars and self-driving trucks. There was an article out just a couple days ago that said the United States Post Office is actually going to start moving mail from one city to another using a self-driving truck. Now, I know I said the same thing, like United States Postal Service, they are like the least technologically savvy agency probably in the entire universe. But it just goes to show they're working with a San Diego-based company that specializes in this, so it's not on the USPS for all of you that are really nervous about this happening right now. And they're still going to have drivers in the truck, but we'll see self-driving trucks before we see self-driving cars, simply for the reason that trucks operate on the highways. They don't really have to drive these back road neighborhoods, and the highways are a lot easier to program for self-driving cars than neighborhoods because there's less decisions. They basically stay in the lane, and if someone cuts them off, they slow down, and they know how to get off on exits. So I think self-driving trucks actually arrive before self-driving cars, and it's bad for the 3.5 million truckers out there because their labor will be displaced by something that's automation. But it's good for the rest of us because that means the cost of shipping things around the country goes down much lower. And this makes us more productive. When we are able to reduce costs, the economy can be more productive, and this allows for economic growth to actually accelerate at a faster pace than it was previously. So that, I think, is the big idea. It's not the technologies themselves, but where the convergence is happening. And you're already seeing this in cities that have these scooters everywhere, and I think there's 7 companies right now that have these scooters that you can rent. And in cities, it helps the last mile program. So instead of taking a taxi a half mile and spending $7 or $8 on it, you can just find a scooter using an app, and you can pay for it using the app, and that's another technology, mobile payments. The scooter, of course, is connected to the wireless grid, so it has the Internet of Things. And on top of that, this wouldn't have been feasible 10 years ago because batteries were too expensive. But the batteries actually last longer now in the scooters. They don't need to be recharged all the time. So it led to this proliferation of scooters in cities across the countries to solve the last mile problem. And that is where you can see the convergence of technology that's happening, which will lead to increased productivity in the same way that it did in the 1920s. So I hope you enjoyed this webinar. Please subscribe to my YouTube page, and I'll talk to you next week. Thank you.